Of course, they did this 30 minutes before the green flag of the Xfinity Series race, but Trackhouse Racing released a statement saying that the team and Zane Smith would no longer continue to be under contract together. Zane Smith released a statement of his own. We're going to read both of them, and we're going to start with Trackhouse, and then after we read the statements, we'll talk about the ramifications of this move. So, from Trackhouse Racing. Trackhouse Racing and Zane Smith have mutually agreed to separate at the conclusion of the 2024 NASCAR Cup Series season, allowing the 25-year-old former NASCAR Truck Series champion to immediately accept other opportunities. Smith drives the number 71 Spire Motorsports Chevrolet in an alliance with Trackhouse Racing and will continue for the remainder of this season. Zane Smith then said, "Obviously, I am disappointed that I've been put in a tough spot. I'm diligently exploring quality driving opportunities and hope to quickly wrap up my plans for next year. Meanwhile, kudos to our number 71 Cup team. We've turned our year around this summer with 6 top 20 finishes in the last 10 races, which includes a top 10 last weekend and a runner-up finish in Nashville. With more determination than ever, I will continue to do what I know best, and that is to work hard, race my heart out, and prove myself. Thank you to everyone that has and continues to stand behind me." So there's a lot of impacts by this, obviously. And even before this statement was released, we knew there was going to be an impact of some sort because of Trackhouse's situation. It all came down to Trackhouse. Now, the understanding is that the new charter agreement's only going to have 3 charters per team. You can't expand beyond that. And also, there was 4 charters available from SHR. We already know one's going to Front Row. We know Gene Haas is retaining one, likely 1 to 2311. Maybe RFK's in the mix now. And then we knew Trackhouse was probably going to get one. But the question was going to be, who gets that ride? Who gets that seat? You had 2 options. Zane Smith, who's a rookie, but he's a Truck Series champion. And then you had Shane van Gisbergen, the guy who was formerly in Australia racing supercars and now has made the move over to the United States to pursue NASCAR full-time, who's a rookie in the Xfinity Series. And, well, ultimately it came down to, I think, results. Both these guys were signed by Trackhouse last year. Both are at very different stages of their career. Zane Smith, only 25. Shane van Gisbergen, 35, so a 10-year difference there. But the way the year started off for Zane Smith was terrible. Now, some of it wasn't his doing, but some of it was. Sometimes, I remember, I think it was Vegas maybe, he hit the wall on lap 4 and that ruined their race. He had a horrendous start to the year. But as he said in his statement, he's really picked it up over the summer. A bunch of top 20s, a couple of top 10s, a runner-up at Nashville. That's the Zane Smith we know. That's the Zane Smith we remember from the Truck Series, who won all those races, who won a championship. Not the Zane Smith from the first part of the season that would finish in the 30s, wreck, have these mistakes. We remember the Zane Smith who, in a midfield car, can consistently run top 20, who can get a top 10 every once in a while, maybe even get a top 5. That's the Zane Smith we know and remember. But ultimately, there's been a bunch of signs pointing to Zane Smith being the odd man out at Trackhouse. And another big sign came earlier today when Trackhouse Racing announced that Shane van Gisbergen would be running more starts in the Cup Series than he was originally scheduled with Colleague. Now, just like Zane Smith, Shane van Gisbergen has been leased out by Trackhouse to Colleague Racing. He's full-time in the Xfinity Series. He's won 3 races this year. He's in the playoffs. And he's also run a handful of Cup starts. I think originally it was 6 or 7 races on the schedule. Well, now he's running 7 of the last 12 Cup Series races. Just today, they added Darlington, Atlanta, and Martinsville to his schedule. He was only originally slated to race at Vegas, Talladega, and Watkins Glen. And then, of course, tomorrow at Daytona. But now, with these added races, and they're not just super speedways, they're not road courses, they're completely different styles of track. It's like Trackhouse is trying to get him some more experience for when he runs full-time Cup next year. And originally, when the reports came out about the 3rd Trackhouse charter, it was, who's going to get it? It's a toss-up. And then it turned into, okay, we think it might be SVG, but Zane Smith's still a candidate, obviously. He's got a great shot. And then it turned into, okay, it's looking like, SVG's got a great shot. He's doing better at this point. Then it turned into, okay, it's probably SVG. And now it's not if, but when is SVG going to be announced as the third Trackhouse guy, leaving Zane Smith as the odd man out. But on the bright side for Zane Smith, he is the leading candidate, I believe, according to the reports, to land the third Front Row Motorsports suite seat. So ultimately, it's going to be a bit of a homecoming. It's going to be a reunion, that's the word, for Zane Smith and Front Row. Of course, he won his Truck Series championship there. He even ran a couple of Cup Series starts for Front Row. And I remember it was about this time last year that Zane Smith made the announcement he was going to race for Trackhouse. He was under contract with Trackhouse, but he ended up getting leased out to Spire. And it seemed like that was going to be their guy of the future, maybe. But here we are 1 year later, and Zane Smith is not going to be at Trackhouse. It's definitely bizarre. It's a little weird. It's a little bizarre, I will admit. They signed him last year. He's a super young driver, and I understand that they're going to put SVG in that third car, but I'm a little surprised that they didn't try to get him somewhere. I mean, Spire still has an open seat. Couldn't have gotten him back there. Colleague, you've got a connection with them. I'm a little surprised, but at the same time, I think the Front Row opening does play a factor in this, in that they have the connection there, Front Row and Zane Smith. It's going to be a competitive ride. Ford's going to want him back, so I think it makes sense from the Zane Smith point of view in terms of a Front Row versus going back to Spire or going even to Colleague or going back to the Xfinity Series or the Truck Series or going to the Xfinity Series. So my guess is that Zane Smith, as the reports say, goes back to Front Row Motorsports. But ultimately, Trackhouse Racing has finally solved their too many seats or too many butts for not enough seats. They have finally found the solution, and that is essentially dumping Zane Smith or letting him walk. I'd really say letting him walk is the best way to put it. But speaking of Front Row, they swept the Front Row for Daytona tomorrow. Michael McDowell is on pole. Todd Gilliland is second. As for the Xfinity Series race, going green in 9 minutes. I will be editing this at the beginning of this race, so that will be fun. Speaking of Trackhouse driver Shane van Gisbergen, he's actually in this race. He's in both races, but Zane Smith, no longer a Trackhouse driver. He will be going elsewhere next year, not confirmed yet, but could be Front Row. And it looks like Shane van Gisbergen is likely to get that third seat at Trackhouse, just waiting for confirmation at this point. But thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. NASCAR news never rests. So I'll see you in the next one.